The morning Nathan Vega walked into the Irongate development headquarters in downtown Dallas, nobody recognized him. That was exactly what he had counted on. He was 37 years old, with the kind of hands that told a story before he opened his mouth. Scarred at the knuckles, rough at the palms, the hands of a man who had once poured footings and pulled wire before he ever signed a contract. His flannel shirt was clean but wrinkled. His work boots had been resoled twice. He carried a manila folder tucked under one arm, and with his other hand he held the hand of his 7-year-old son, Eli. Eli wore his school jacket and his good sneakers, the ones his grandmother had bought him at the start of the year. Tucked under Eli's arm was a small yellow toy hard hat, the kind you found in children's construction playsets. Grace had given it to him the Christmas before she got sick, wrapping it carefully in paper, with little hammers printed on it, laughing when Eli put it on his head and announced he was going to build skyscrapers with Daddy someday. The hat was faded now. Eli carried it everywhere. Dorothy Hines looked up from the reception desk when they came through the revolving door. She was 62, silver-haired, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the kind of calm that came from working the same desk for 19 years. She watched the man settle his hand on the boy's shoulder. Something in the gesture held her attention a moment longer than usual. Then she handed over a visitor badge and pointed them toward the waiting area without asking questions. She had been at this desk long enough to know that some people walked into a building already carrying something heavier than whatever was in their hands. Nathan thanked her quietly. He led Eli to a row of low chairs beside a potted ficus and they sat down together. "Is this where you used to work?" Eli asked. "Something like that," Nathan said. "It's really tall. 38 floors." Eli looked up at the atrium ceiling, counting nothing in particular. Then he set the yellow hard hat on his knee and held it steady there, the way he always did when he was thinking. The waiting area was visible to the elevator bank and to a long glass-walled meeting room accessible through a private corridor on the far side of the lobby. Through 2 panes of glass and across the marble floor, Nathan could make out the shapes of people at a long table. He could not hear them. He could only watch. 20 minutes passed, then 40, an hour. A woman in the corridor near the conference room noticed Eli and slowed her pace. She leaned toward a colleague and said something. The colleague glanced over. Neither of them came to ask if the child was hungry. Nobody brought water. A man in a suit walked by the waiting area, saw the manila folder on Nathan's knee and the yellow toy on Eli's, and looked away with the particular expression of a person who has already decided what he is seeing. Nathan took a granola bar from his jacket pocket and passed it to Eli without a word. Eli broke it in half. "Do you want some?" "I'm good," Nathan said. Eli ate his half carefully. A few crumbs landed on the polished floor. One of the associates passing through glanced at them and didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Nathan bent down and gathered the crumbs into his palm. Inside the conference room, Bradford Kohler sat at the head of the table. He was 53, CFO, and had come to Irongate Development 8 years ago, with a resume that was all surface and no roots. He had the confidence of a man who had never once been wrong about anything because he had never allowed himself to be measured against the things that actually mattered. Beside him sat Drew Colton, 46, CO, who had the habit of draping his arm over the back of his chair in a way that suggested the chair belonged to him personally, along with everything else in the room. At the near end of the table sat Carmen Wexler, 34, who had been brought in as acting chief executive 6 months ago, when the board decided the company needed a fresh face for an uncertain transition. Carmen was sharp and careful, and had learned early in her career that the fastest way to lose ground in a room full of older men was to look uncertain. So she had taught herself to look certain even when she wasn't, and over time she had become so practiced at it that she had stopped noticing what she was actually uncertain about. Drew was the one who spotted them first. He turned from the table, looked through the glass toward the waiting area, and spoke just loud enough for the people nearest to him to hear. Who brings a kid to a job interview? He let it sit a moment. Guy out there's applying for the site supervisor opening. Showed up looking like he drove here straight from a job site. A few people at the table smiled. Eli heard the laughter through the glass. He couldn't make out the words, but laughter carries its own message. He moved a little closer to his father on the chair. At 12 minutes past the hour, a junior HR associate came out to the waiting area. She was apologetic in the way of someone who had been told to be apologetic without being told why. We're running a bit behind, won't be too much longer. That's fine, Nathan said. She hesitated, her eyes moving to Eli. This is a professional environment, so. He's fine, Nathan said evenly. She left. Eli looked up at his father. Is she mad at me? No, she's just busy. She looked at me like the lady at the grocery store used to look at Mom when she used the coupons. Nathan put his arm around his son's shoulders and didn't answer. 15 minutes later, Drew Colton walked out of the conference room with Bradford and one of the board members. They passed within 10 feet of the waiting area on their way to the elevator bank. Drew slowed. He looked at Nathan. Then at the manila folder. Then at the worn work boots. You the site supervisor candidate? He said. That's right, Nathan said. Drew glanced at Eli. His voice was pleasant the way cold water is pleasant, before you understand how cold it actually is. Friendly piece of advice. This isn't a family event. If you want anyone here to take you seriously, leave the kid at home next time. And maybe ditch the flannel. There were people in the corridor. A few of them heard. One of the associates near the elevator pressed the button a little faster. Eli's jaw tightened. His hand found the yellow hard hat and held it very still. My dad works harder than anyone in this whole building, Eli said quietly. Drew looked at the boy. He smiled the way adults smile at children when they find them amusing rather than right. That's sweet, he said. Then he kept walking. Eli's eyes went bright. He pressed the hard hat against his stomach and stared straight ahead at nothing. Nathan laid his hand over his son's. Hey, he said, very low, look at me. Eli looked at him. His chin was working. You know what that hard hat is? Nathan said. Mom's, Eli said. And what did she say when she gave it to you? Eli was quiet for a second. Then, she said a good builder knows what he's made of before he ever picks up a tool. Nathan nodded once. Right. Carmen Wexler came to the edge of the waiting area because voices in the corridor had reached her through the open door. She looked at Nathan, then at Eli. For a half second, something moved in her expression. The small reflex of a person who has not completely stopped feeling things, even if she works hard at it. Then her composure reassembled. Sir, she said measured, we need to keep this area professional. If the child is going to be a distraction. Nathan looked up at her. Is a 7-year-old sitting still on a chair a distraction to you? Carmen paused. The question touched something she didn't want touched. Drew stepped back toward them from the elevator alcove. We need him out, Carmen. We have Meridian Capital in there. Is the contract with Meridian Capital already on the table? Nathan asked. The words landed differently than any of the others. Carmen's eyes sharpened. Bradford, coming out of the elevator alcove, stopped where he was. Nathan stood. He looked across the lobby at Dorothy. She had already left her desk and was walking toward them with the quiet purposefulness of a woman who had been waiting for this moment without knowing what it was. She came to Eli and held out her hand. Will you sit with me a minute, sweetheart? She said. I've got a drawer full of sugar-free mints that I pretend are only for me. Eli looked at his father. Go ahead, Nathan said. I'll be right back. Eli took Dorothy's hand. He kept the yellow hard hat tucked under his arm. Nathan took his visitor badge from around his neck and set it on the reception counter. Then he walked toward the conference room corridor. Drew stepped forward. You can't walk in there. Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt and drew out a black card, not a business card, a charter authentication card, matte black, embossed in silver, the kind issued only once, to a founder. At the moment of original incorporation, the card read, Nathan A. Vega, founding principal, Irongate Development LLC, Charter Shareholder Authority. The security officer near the corridor door took one look and stepped back immediately. Drew's voice went up. Block him, he has no right. Nobody moved. Nathan pushed open the conference room door. Bradford Kohler went white. He had seen that jaw before, in old photographs, in the framed founding document that used to hang in the lobby until 2 years ago, when Bradford had quietly replaced it with a market performance chart. Carmen did not understand yet. She had never seen a photograph of Nathan Vega. She had only been shown the name in an old org chart, and told he was a former partner who had stepped away after personal tragedy. She had not been told he still held controlling interest. Nathan walked to the head of the table. The seat there had been left empty. It was always left empty, and nobody had ever asked why. He set his manila folder down. The sound was small. The room understood it immediately. He opened the folder and placed the charter card beside Bradford's draft contract. Then he spoke without raising his voice. I sat in your waiting room for 75 minutes, he said. I watched how this company treats the people it considers unimportant. Now I need everyone in this room to understand who is standing at this table. In the first minute, the charter authentication was confirmed. The general counsel ran the card through the company's registry and the system returned one line. Founding principal, full charter authority, active. Bradford tried to argue that Nathan had removed himself from operations. Nathan looked at him without blinking. Stepping back from operations is not the same as surrendering equity. You know that. You structured the arrangement yourself. In the second minute, Nathan set the Meridian Capital contract beside Irongate Development's original incorporation charter, side by side, both open. He turned to the page that listed Irongate's founding mission: to develop and deliver not fewer than 2,400 units of affordable workforce housing in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area over 10 operating years. Then he opened the Meridian contract to the executive summary. The luxury conversion would eliminate all 1,800 remaining promised units and replace them with market-rate condominiums, starting at $890,000. On the current waiting list for Irongate's affordable units, 412 families. Average household income on that list, $38,000 per year. He did not editorialize. He let the numbers sit in the room and do their work. In the third minute, Nathan exposed Bradford. He produced a consulting agreement between Bradford Kohler and a firm called Terrace Advisory Group, LLC, guaranteeing Bradford $4.2 million in personal fees contingent on the Meridian contract closing. He then set down the incorporation record for Terrace Advisory Group. Its two registered principals shared a home address with Bradford's sister-in-law. Bradford opened his mouth. Nathan set a fourth document on top of the first three. It was an email Bradford had sent to his deputy 11 months ago. The subject line read, Garfield Street, let it run over budget. The body read, we need the cost overrun record before Q2. Can't justify the pivot without them. A board member on the far side of the table moved her chair back slightly. Stay where you are, Nathan said without looking at her. Your name is in the appendix. She stayed. In the fourth minute, Nathan exposed Drew. He laid out a series of purchase orders, each redirected through a subcontractor called Redline Site Services, LLC. The funds were meant for the Garfield Street and Elm Fork affordable projects, the two furthest along in construction. Instead, they had been routed through Redline to a private account whose beneficial owner was Drew Colton's brother-in-law. Drew's face went through several colors before settling on something close to gray. He stood up. His voice cracked at the edges. You abandoned this company. You disappeared for 2 years. You left us to run a business in a market that was crushing affordable margins, and you sat at home grieving while the rest of us tried to keep the lights on. You don't get to walk in here and... Nathan looked at him for the first time directly. I left to raise my son after I buried my wife. She grew up in subsidized housing in Fort Worth. She believed that what we were building here was the most important work either of us would ever do in our lives. You stayed to sell the land she believed in for a commission. A pause. Don't confuse those two things. The room went very still. It was not only a rebuttal, it was a verdict. Drew sat down. In the 5th minute, Nathan slid a folder across the table to Carmen. She opened it. Inside were the meeting summaries Bradford had prepared for her review and, beside each summary, the original document it was based on. The differences were so significant. 3 clauses had been removed entirely from the versions delivered to Carmen's desk. One was a covenant requiring majority shareholder approval for any mission change, affecting more than 20% of planned affordable units. Her electronic signature appeared on an authorization memo that referenced, in its final appendix, the full elimination of the affordable housing portfolio. The full appendix had never been included in any document she had received. Her hands were still on the table. She read the 2 versions again, slowly. The thing she had been most certain of, her own command of the situation she was supposed to be leading, disassembled itself quietly without drama. She understood exactly what had been done and exactly how cleanly she had been used. A memory arrived without her inviting it. Her father, a pipe fitter, coming home from a 3-month stretch in Midland, with calloused hands and a paycheck that barely covered 2 months of rent. She had been 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, while her mother counted the money twice. She had promised herself that day that she would grow up to be the kind of person no one could use. She had spent the last 6 months being used without knowing it. In the 6th minute, Nathan drew from the folder a single sheet of paper. It was the founding emergency reinstatement clause, written into Irongate's charter on the night it was first incorporated. The night Nathan and his original partner James had signed the papers at a kitchen table in a rented house in Fort Worth, Grace asleep in the next room because it was past midnight, and she had work in the morning. But she had stayed up until 11 making sure the coffee didn't run out. The clause allowed the founding principal to retake full operational authority if evidence of fraud, mission abandonment, or fiduciary breach could be demonstrated before a quorum of witnesses. There were 11 people in the room. That was more than a quorum. Nathan signed the reinstatement order with a pen he took from his shirt pocket. It was an ordinary pen, the kind you bought in a pack of 12. Grace had been using it to mark up a floor plan the week before she went into the hospital. He had never thrown it away. Then he set down 4 termination notices. Bradford Kohler, Drew Colton, the board member whose name appeared in the appendix, a second board member whose signature appeared across 3 of the shell company authorizations. Bradford threatened lawsuits, regulatory complaints, a press campaign. He said Nathan had been absent, negligent, that no court would uphold a reinstatement based on documents obtained from an unnamed source. Nathan answered without ceremony. Discovery will tell the courts where these documents came from. And the 412 families on our waitlist will tell them what the consequence of this contract would have been. He looked at Bradford evenly. Sue. The security team entered from the corridor. This time they did not walk toward Nathan. They walked toward Bradford and Drew. As Bradford was escorted out through the lobby, he passed the waiting area. Dorothy still sat with Eli. The boy watched the man in the expensive suit walk past with a security officer at each elbow, and he didn't fully understand what was happening. But he understood that the expression on the man's face was not the expression of someone going somewhere he wanted to go. Eli pressed the yellow hard hat a little tighter against his side. Carmen did not leave with the others. She sat in the emptied room for a long time, the 2 sets of documents still open in front of her, the summaries Bradford had given her, and the originals Nathan had brought. She was not a woman who cried in boardrooms. She did not cry now, but there was a stillness in her that was different from the practiced stillness she had maintained for years. This one had no performance in it. When Nathan came back through the door, she was still sitting there. He sat across from her. How much did you know? She considered the question before she answered it. I knew the affordable margins were tight. I knew Bradford was pushing for a strategic pivot. I didn't know about the families on the wait list. I didn't know about the shell companies. I didn't know my signature was on anything I hadn't read. She paused. That last part is my failure. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why didn't you just call your lawyers? Why didn't you go through official channels? Because at least 2 board members were compromised and I didn't know which others had been briefed. Official channels were the channels Bradford controlled. He looked down at his hands. And because I needed to know what this company felt like from the outside, the way a site supervisor candidate with a kid and a beat-up folder feels it. If you lose sight of that, you've already lost the thing worth building. She was quiet for a time, then she said the 412 families. Yeah. The Garfield Street project, how far behind is it? 3 months. Repairable, if the diverted funds are recovered. She nodded once. She reached for a legal pad. Then let's figure out how to repair it. They worked past midnight. Nathan called Eli every hour. Dorothy had driven the boy home and was watching him, had fed him dinner, had let him sleep in the guest room with the yellow hard hat on the pillow beside him. On the 3rd call, Eli was already half asleep. Did you fix it, Dad? Getting there, Nathan said. Good. A mom would say get some sleep. She would. Get some sleep, Dad. Nathan smiled for the first time since he had walked through the revolving door that morning. Good night, buddy. The next morning, Nathan addressed the company. He did not change his shirt. He stood at the podium in the same flannel he had worn the day before. Because he wanted the people who had built this company from a 2-page charter into something real. The project managers, the site crews, the drafters, the analysts who had stayed honest, to understand that he was not presenting a performance. He told them about Grace. He told them about a girl who had grown up in a 2-bedroom unit in a subsidized apartment complex in Fort Worth, whose mother had worked 2 jobs, who had attended a school that sometimes ran out of paper, and who had grown into a woman who believed, without reservation, that the shortage of decent affordable housing was not an economic inevitability, but a choice that certain people were making, and that different people could unmake. He told them about James, his founding partner, who had died in a trench collapse on a job site in Denton 5 years ago, whose name was still on the founding charter, because Nathan had never been willing to take it off. And then he said something not all founders say. He admitted his own fault. I made a mistake. I believed that holding controlling interest in this company was the same as protecting it. It is not. A company is protected by the people inside it who every single day choose to do the right thing. I was not here to make that choice beside you. That is on me. He announced 3 decisions. The Meridian Capital transaction was cancelled in its entirety. An independent investigation had been opened, and all evidence of fraud had been transferred to the appropriate authorities. And the Garfield Street and Elm Fork affordable housing projects would resume immediately, with restored budgets and a target timeline that would put the first families into their homes within 14 months. He looked out at the room. A woman in the 3rd row stood up first. She was a project coordinator who had spent 2 years on the Garfield Street development, then an older engineer in the back, then more, until most of the room was on its feet. Paul Ibarra, 32, junior financial analyst, who had been sitting in the second-to-last row, certain he was about to be escorted from the building, stood up last. He had sent the anonymous email from his personal phone in the parking garage of his apartment complex at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, after 3 weeks of sitting on the documents and telling himself it wasn't his problem. He stood because everyone else did, and because he was beginning to understand that it had always been his problem, and that knowing the truth had made it his, the moment he learned it. Nathan saw him. Paul Ibarra, stay after, please. Paul stayed. Nathan shook his hand and told him what the email had cost and what it had been worth. Paul pressed his lips together. He said he had almost deleted it 4 times. I know, Nathan said. That's exactly what made sending it matter. Carmen stood beside Nathan at the end of the meeting. She did not stand in front of him. She spoke briefly, without notes. She said she had been used without knowing it, and that not knowing was her failure, and that she intended to stay and be accountable for it. She said she had spent 6 months in this building being cold because she had been told that warmth was a liability, and that she had been wrong. Then she said one more thing. There was a man in this lobby yesterday with his son, waiting for over an hour, and I told him to keep his child quiet or leave. I was wrong about that too. 2 months passed. Bradford Kohler and Drew Colton were named in civil and criminal proceedings covering wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of corporate funds. Terrace Advisory Group was dissolved. The Meridian Capital contract was voided. 3 board members resigned. The investigation confirmed everything in Paul's documents, and then found 3 more things Paul hadn't known to look for. Irongate development did not recover overnight. The stock dropped in the first week. Several institutional investors pulled back. Some in the press said Nathan had acted on sentiment, had blown up a profitable deal, had let grief override judgment. None of them had grown up watching their father resole the same pair of work boots twice. The Garfield Street project broke ground again on a Thursday in October. Nathan was there in work boots and a hard hat. Eli was beside him in a child-sized version of the same. The yellow toy one, balanced on top of the real one. The project coordinator, who had stood up first at the all-company meeting, handed Nathan a shovel. He handed it to Eli. Eli dug first. One quiet morning in November, Nathan brought Eli back to the Irongate lobby. The staff knew him now. People stopped to say good morning, to ask about Eli, to say that the Garfield Street framing was ahead of schedule. Nathan nodded and thanked them, but he hadn't brought his son back for any of that. He led Eli to the same row of low chairs, where they had sat for 75 minutes on that first morning. They sat the same way. Nathan's arm around Eli's shoulders, the boy's feet not quite reaching the floor, the yellow hard hat balanced on Eli's knee. "Why are we sitting here?" Eli asked. Nathan looked at the lobby around them, at Dorothy at her desk, who had already seen them and was smiling with her whole face, at the elevator bank and the marble floor, and the potted ficus that hadn't moved an inch. "Because this is the place I want you to remember," Nathan said. "Not because of what someone did to us here. Because of what you did." He looked at his son. "When that man was unkind, you told him your father worked harder than anyone in this building. You were right. And I want you to remember that you already knew it, even when you were scared." Eli thought about this. He turned the yellow hard hat in his hands, the way he always did when he was taking something seriously. Carmen came across the lobby toward them. She wore a dark blue dress, her hair loose, which was new. She stopped a few feet away, and then did something Nathan had not seen her do once in 6 months of working beside her. She crouched down so that her face was level with Eli's. "I wasn't kind to you when you were here before," she said. "You didn't deserve that. I'm sorry." Eli looked at her with the careful measuring gaze of a child who has been hurt and is deciding whether the hurt is finished. Then he held out the yellow hard hat. Carmen took it with both hands. She turned it over and looked at the inside, the way you look at something you want to understand rather than just hold. Then she passed it back to him. "My mom gave it to me," Eli said. "She said a good builder knows what they're made of." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "She was right," she said. The 3 of them stood. They walked together to the elevator. Dorothy watched from her desk. She had been at this building for 19 years, and she had seen it lose its way and find it again, and she had seen the exact moment when a room remembered what it was supposed to be. The elevator doors opened. Nathan stepped in with Eli's hand in his and Carmen beside him. The doors slid closed. They rode up together. Not to reclaim anything, not to prove anything to anyone, but because there was work left to do, the kind that Grace had believed in, before any of them had learned to believe in it, and the people meant to do it had finally found their way to the same floor.